We were just a bunch of nerdy kids who ignored the haters. We took their ridicule and we built on it. And when some of us gave up, well, we built on that too. Built resilience, built on a mission to make things a little better every day until the users came. Then the haters were VCs who scoffed at our audacity. This just isn't the way things are done. But we kept building. Users turned into teams, turned into companies, running their entire businesses on our apps. Then the software giants came after us. We weren't proven, we weren't fully featured, our radical cloud model wasn't secure. But we built on. And today, as companies adopt the cloud to move faster, teams are finding themselves slowed down by each other's efforts. The skeptics are claiming we'll never develop innovation at scale. But now, DevOps have come to the cloud, ushering in a new era of transformation. Companies can release on demand across hundreds of environments, innovating faster with fewer conflicts and fewer disruptions. There will always be challenges. There will always be naysayers. And we'll build on.
So today we're going to be speaking about Salesforce and the CIA. And if you're wondering, no, it's not about the Central Intelligence Agency, but we are going to answer the question, who's protecting your data in Salesforce? And without further ado, just want to introduce myself. My name is Susanna St. Germain. I'm a Salesforce MVP based in Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. I am pretty active in the Salesforce community. I'm a co-lead of Ladies Be Architects. I'm a Rad Women Code coach and also a co-lead of the Boston Admin User Group. And in my day job is as a technical architect at Odaseva, and Odaseva is a Salesforce partner and ISV. I'm also very active on Twitter, so if you don't yet follow me, please go ahead and give me a follow. My handle is @SunnydaleLow, and would really appreciate connecting with you after the session, answering any questions you might have. That's the place to get in touch with me. So let's dive into this content. I know that this slide might look a little bit salesy, and you're thinking, wait a second, isn't this the architect track? Shouldn't we be talking about something more technical? And I ask you to bear with me for a second because I have an interesting point to make around data. And if you're like me, so I've been working on the Salesforce platform for, I just double checked my numbers because Peter was so exact in how many months he'd been working as a Salesforce developer. I've been working as a Salesforce admin or developer or now architect for the last 8 years and 1 month. And throughout all those different roles in lots of different companies, if I'm being honest with myself, I'll admit to you guys today that I didn't think so much about data. And I always kind of thought about data, well, our users are inputting that, and if they put in bad data, then they're going to have bad outcomes, and they need to be worried about deduping, and maybe I'll buy a tool to help them dedupe. But at the end of the day, I always sort of thought about data as the end user's responsibility. And if you are like me, you're probably more focused on the cool automations that you can build with the Salesforce platform and keeping up to date on release notes and building really efficient code, or even if you're more of an architect or a technical lead, maybe figuring out the most elegant way to meet a set of users' business requirements. But unless you're looking at a set of requirements for the CTA exam, requirements in the real world don't often include data concerns. And that's because customers don't always know the right questions to ask. They're not always thinking about how to better protect their own data. So I think it's important to reflect on this, because the reason that we're all here working in the Salesforce ecosystem, and the reason that our companies have all bought into this big audacious goal of the connected customer, is all focused around data when you start to think about it. Because we hear that customers expect, right? They have these expectations, and that nearly 80% of customers say that the experience that they have with a company is more important than its products and services. But how do we actually know our customer? And when you think about it, the lens that you see your customer through is through the data that they entrust to you. And again, thinking from my admin, developer, architect hat, you're like, well, okay, we need to collect their data. So we'll build a really nice interface, or we'll use a form and we'll create validation rules, or we'll architect the best possible solution to gather this data. Surely they'll just give it to us. Surely a customer will give us their data. But when you actually look at the numbers, 75% of customers don't trust businesses with their data. And they actually, they have these thoughts for really good reasons, because when you look at, again, when you look at the numbers, more than 30% of businesses, and that's businesses big and small, businesses like Facebook, Walmart, small businesses, even nonprofit and higher education institutions, 30% of businesses have a data incident each year. And in addition to that, this number is what really gets me. 86% of businesses and nonprofits and companies are not ready for privacy regulations like the GDPR in Europe and like the CCPA in California and the United States. So if customers don't trust your company that you work for as a Salesforce admin, developer, or architect, then customers won't give you the data that's needed to use Salesforce to its most potential. And at the end of the day, businesses that aren't connected to their customers lose to competitors who are more connected. So I hope that I've made the case to you that data really is your company's most important resource. Maybe it deserves a little more attention than some of us have given it in the past. So with that, we are going to now see how much you know about Salesforce, about data in Salesforce. So we're going to do a little bit of a data pop quiz. Go ahead and write your, I know Leah had us get our pens and papers out. Go ahead and write your answers down on a piece of paper. If you're feeling very ambitious, feel free to pop them in the chat. But we have 4 short questions just to see how much we know about data in Salesforce. So question number 1, it's Salesforce's responsibility to protect my data. True or false? Okay, question number 2. I can use the weekly export to recover my data quickly. True or false? Okay, question number 3. Salesforce can Salesforce can restore my data in an emergency. True or false? I like seeing these answers coming in. This is fun. Okay, and then the last question, you guys. This is a long one. It's possible to roll back the Salesforce database in order to recover your data at a certain point in time. True or false? Okay. So how did you do? If you said that the answer to all 4 questions was false or were false, you would be correct. But if you didn't, it's okay. You're in pretty good company of folks who didn't quite know the answers to all of those questions. There was a study by ESG recently where they asked CIOs about their beliefs and convictions and understanding of data protection in regards to SaaS, or software as a service applications. And 1 out of 3 CIOs believed that SaaS applications don't need to be backed up. And in addition, those CIOs said that they rely solely on the SaaS vendor, and in this case, it would be Salesforce, to protect their data. So I saw some truths in there, partially truths, and a couple of those questions could be argued. But at the end of the day, the point I'm trying to make is that even if we all got all the questions right here, us as Salesforce experts and architects, developers, and admins, there is still a lot of education that we need to do out in the community, out in the IT space for some of our most senior partners, to make sure that they understand that they need to protect their data, not just from external corruption. I know a lot of people think, well, no one's going to target me for some sort of data breach, but we're going to look at this in a little bit together, that the most common data corruptions are actually internal to your company. So all of this to say that every Salesforce implementation must include a data protection architecture design. So as an architect, this is a challenge that we need to bake in our designs when we're working with our customers, when we're working with our companies. So for some of you, and maybe you might have this conversation with your CIO, with someone at your company, and they might say, well, since Salesforce manages the infrastructure for me, they manage the servers, that's why we went with the cloud solution in the first place. since they're managing that infrastructure and since they're all about trust, our data is protected, right? And the truth is that that's not exactly true, because Salesforce does manage the servers at the physical level. You can see that if there's a database hardware failure, that is Salesforce's responsibility. And that's why we love cloud solutions. We don't need to worry about protecting our servers, about putting in sprinklers in case the server room catches on fire. But what's different is for a data loss, or even a partial data loss, there is not a way for us as Salesforce customers to roll back the database at a physical level. So you'll see that blank spot down there. The only way for I'm talking about any ISV, any vendor, any customer, to get data out of Salesforce and to get data back in is to use the APIs. And we all know as good architects and developers and admins that there's lots of governor limits, there's lots of considerations to take into account when we work with the APIs. So to sort of recap, if a user happened to delete a record, we're not talking about malicious attacks externally, we're talking about internal corruption, and that's the most common data corruption that can happen. Maybe just a fat finger mistake or buggy code that goes ahead and updates records in a way that they weren't supposed to be updated. If something like that happened, Salesforce won't be able to help. So to preserve customer data, again, we really need, as good architects, to start thinking about data protection. Okay, so if data protection is your responsibility now amongst all the other things that you do, where do you even start, right? Because none of us are going to become an expert overnight. And I would challenge that most of us never will become an information security expert, because InfoSec is an incredibly complex space. But what I want to speak with you about today is how we as good architects and developers and admins can start to know enough about information security and data protection to ask the right questions and to make sure that we're guiding our customers down the right road on their data protection journey. So today, I'm going to introduce you to a model that you can start to use to ask the right questions that will ultimately drive better architectural decisions for the security of your data in your Salesforce org. So on the screen right here, you can see the CIA Triad. And this is a model that was designed to guide policies for information security within an organization. This is not a Salesforce thing. This exists. We looked at the things that we can't leverage in traditional database technologies. This is something that we can actually leverage. This is a framework that applies whether we're using an on-prem system or a system in the cloud. So these elements that you can see on the screen are considered the three most crucial components of security. And in this context, we're going to look at what these words exactly mean and the different sets of tools and choices you can make in your Salesforce application when it comes to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So first up is confidentiality. So this one is going to be the term that is probably the most familiar, whether you're an admin or an architect. In this context, confidentiality is a set of rules that limits access to information. So the principle of least privilege. We want to make sure that we are giving users only the access that they need, the minimum access they need to do their job. And there are a lot of tools that Salesforce provides that we can do that with. So tools like profiles and permission sets, field level security, org-wide defaults, password policies, all of these things, all of these tools that we can use to limit access to information. But it's important to know as an architect that it's not just tools that will get you to the place that you need to be in order to protect your data. It is having the right tools, but it's also having the right processes and educating people about the actions that they take and how they can impact the confidentiality of your data. Just to illustrate maybe the policy point, with GDPR and CCPA, those rules are all around confidentiality. And you might have a customer that you're working for that says, okay, I need to implement GDPR. Well, do you need to really delete all that data? And the answer is no, you don't need to delete every single piece of data that might have touched that customer individual record at a point in time, because some of that data belongs to your organization. So there's some architectural decisions that go into there around anonymizing and pseudo-anonymizing. onto integrity. So integrity in this context means the assurance that the information in your database is trustworthy and accurate. So this can mean a lot of things. Really, it means protecting the integrity of your data and guarding it against external data breaches, but also internal data corruption, like we talked about. So having the audit trail and being able to access that, that's a great tool that Salesforce provides to us to be able to see what folks have done, see if an integration has corrupted a set of your records. Also, less event monitoring, again, falls under that sort of obvious tools that are available for integrity purposes, but some uncommon things that I want to point out. You might not think about automatically when you think about integrity. Things like code coverage. So writing good unit tests so that you know if your code is misfiring and manipulating data in a way that you don't expect. That can fall under the umbrella of setting up a good integrity architecture for your customer. Also, test data. This is one of my new favorite topics. So we know that we can propagate test data into scratch orders and sandboxes and things like that. But how do you make sure that test data is the same or has a good subset of records to do things like UAT in a really big enterprise space? And finally, integrity. One of the sort of obvious things to talk about with integrity is making sure that you have a backup, making sure that if for whatever reason your data was corrupted, that you are able to restore it and you have that integrity is kept in place. And then just the final piece of the CIA triad, and this one is one of them that I think is the most interesting from an architectural perspective, and that's availability. So availability in this context means a guarantee of reliable access to the information by authorized people. So we have the confidentiality, we've locked down our profiles, but how do we make sure that the people who need to see the data can see the data? And so there's a lot of really interesting concerns and trade-offs that you need to start making in this space. So when we think about having the backup, that's great. But how long will it take us to use that backup to get back to 100% operational? So in that case, different concerns come into place. Things like RPO, which is the recovery point objective, or it's you can see on the screen the point between when you have the data loss and when you have your backup. So if you're using something like the weekly export, for instance, and you had a data corruption on Thursday, your recovery point would nearly be a whole week. Is that okay with your business? That's something that you have to discuss with your customers and agree upon what's that acceptable RPO. And same with RTO is recovery time objective. So how long it takes, how much downtime is acceptable to your business when you start to recover from that data corruption. And when you speak with your customer and understand what they're looking for, there's lots of different levers you can pull, lots of different resources out in the community and in our third-party app exchange space. And depending on the answer, you might have very different outcomes and very different architectural considerations and choices to make. And then my two last favorite points, one is around large data volumes. So you might be surprised to learn that large data volumes have a massive impact on availability. It might not be the first thing you think of, but if you have very large data volumes, you're accessing things like even list views, let alone custom code or very large reports. Your large data volumes can have direct impact on how available your data is. So in a case of large data volumes, what do? Do you need to archive that data? Do you need to just delete it? What sort of business rules and processes do you need to put in place along with some tool to make sure that you're extracting that data and either disposing of it or archiving it? And then finally, high availability and ultra high availability. Another really interesting architectural sort of consideration. We know that Salesforce guarantees and lots of cloud providers guarantee a certain amount of uptime, right? So just to take as an example, if you have 99.9% availability, what does that actually look like in practice? So 99.9% means that throughout the year, you would have 9 hours of downtime. Is that acceptable? Is that acceptable if that happens at the last day of your fiscal year? So finally, and I think that's a great segue to our wrap-up slide. So we know that Salesforce is reliable and it provides us a lot of trust, and that's why we all love it. But while it is reliable, it's not always on. There's scheduled maintenance periods. We're just coming up to the anniversary of the permission getting, right, from last year that caused several days of downtime for some customers. So for mission critical applications, like a call center or something like that, do you need to look into a solution where you can read and write data if Salesforce is down? And does your customer have the resources and really the right business case for that? So in summary, I know we just had a quick 15 minutes together, 20 minutes together, but in summary, you are responsible for the security of your data. And now more than ever, with the retirement of the data recovery service on July 31st, luckily there are great existing best practices like the CIA Triad that we looked at today, frameworks, and also an ecosystem full of partners and experts. And what I think is most interesting, and again, to kick off the architecture track, data protection might seem a little boring on the surface, but like any architectural consideration, it's all about trade-off. It's not just buying a tool. It's about the processes, the people, the requirements, and also the trade-offs that you can live with and finding that optimal solution to protect your data. So I hope that I made the case that data protection is actually a very interesting architectural topic. And if I did, there are lots of different resources out there on Trailhead, on my company's website, Otisevo. We have a great example of the CIA Triad in action. Also, some more information about Salesforce Data Recovery Services, Salesforce Data Recovery Service retirement. And with that, thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining us.